There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, Wisconsin Land and Water Annual Conference. My name is Christina Anderson. I am the Climate Resilience Program Manager of a new program we have here at Wisconsin Land and Water, and I'm very excited to have both Kathy and Bob here, Kathy from Dane County and Bob Micheel from Monroe County, to talk to us about some of the things they have been doing in their counties to respond to climate change. We'll have a couple of minutes between each of these sessions, and then hopefully a little bit of time at the end. So with that, Kathy, I'm going to let you go right ahead and get started. Thanks.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Christina. And it's great to be here today. So I'm Kathy Kuntz. I'm the director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. And maybe the place to start is to acknowledge that our office, the Dane County Executive Joe Parisi, created our office in 2016. And for him, it was really the next logical step that for decades, Dane County had been working to preserve land and to green its own operations. So we get about 45% of our electricity for county operations from renewable sources today. We're on track to be 100% by 2024. We have this facility over here on the right at our county landfill that captures the methane, cleans and compresses it, turns it into renewable natural gas that powers more than half of our snow plows. We sell RNG to Quick Trip. We've done a lot internally, and really Exec Parisi created our office because he thought that the county needed to lead in climate action at the county-wide level. So for residents and businesses across and local governments across the county, because in 2016, there wasn't a lot of leadership happening at other levels. So he said, let's have an office and move this forward. Our office then convened a climate council, and we drew folks from a variety of places across the county, business, nonprofits, farms, the university, to come together to create a climate action plan. And whenever I talk about our climate action plan, I like to point out it's got kind of two constructs that are really important. At the very first meeting of the Climate Council, Exec Parisi spoke to them, and he said, you know, it would be easy for you guys to spend months complaining about what the state won't let you do or what the feds should be doing. I don't want that. I want results. I want you to figure out, given the authority we have, what can we get done? So there's a pragmatism kind of embedded in what we do. At the same time, as that council talked, they really recognized that if we're going to address climate change in our county, we have an opportunity to do it in a way that helps us address equity and justice, that delivers economic, health, and ecosystem benefits, that makes us more resilient, and that bridges our rural and urban divide. So I like to think that, you know, in a lot of ways, we're very pragmatic, but we're also very visionary in what we're doing here. A couple of kind of background things to say about our process. So we worked pretty closely with the Wisconsin Initiative for Climate Change Impacts to understand those, you know, what's already happening to our climate in Dane County that we need to take into account as we go forward. We're getting hotter and wetter. That's not maybe a little bit hotter and wetter than some other places in the state, but you know, it's what we're all facing. The other kind of grounding thing we did is we did a baseline to understand what are the emissions that everything in Dane County is producing right now. And so 2017 is our baseline year. And in 2017, we produced 7.5 million metric tons of carbon equivalents from the things we were doing. And the biggest piece of this you can see is electricity. In Wisconsin, a lot of our electricity still comes from burning coal and natural gas. It's relatively dirty, and certainly in 2017, it was dirtier than it is today. So that's more than a third of our emissions in Dane County. These two pieces that are labeled residential and commercial, that's the natural gas we burn to heat space and water in our buildings. So really about half of our pie is the built environment. And then the next big piece is transportation for us. And then there's everything else. So that helped us think about what our priorities were. Our office convened about a dozen subject matter expert working groups. So a group about agriculture, a group about renewable energy, and one about transportation. Those groups of experts developed recommendations that they took back to the Climate Council. And in some cases, the Climate Council embraced that recommendation as it came. In other cases, there was a lot of back and forth before something was agreed upon. In the end, there are about a little bit over 100 recommendations in our climate action plan. I'm not going to talk about 100 recommendations because that's insane. I'm going to give you sort of a framework to understand what kinds of strategies we're going after. So the biggest piece of our efforts is around reducing emissions. And that really falls into three big strategies. The first is about eliminating waste. Now, certainly that's wasted energy, but it's also wasted water, wasted food, wasted commercial goods. Anytime you're taking resources, processing them, refining them, packaging them, moving them around the country or even just the county, and then tossing them in the trash, it's insane. Those are all emissions we didn't have to make. So our first priority is really around efficiency. The next priority is about getting the energy we really need from clean sources. So for us, that's that electricity coming from wind and solar. I mentioned the renewable natural gas from the landfill. We also, our landfill facility has an offloading station. So we've got 2 dairy digesters in the county that are now making RNG and offloading them at our landfill and selling that RNG into the pipeline. The last piece is really about using that clean energy. You know, over the next decade, we're going to talk more and more about electrifying buildings, about electric vehicles and RNG vehicles. All of those things reduce emissions. The other piece of our plan is about increasing natural carbon sequestration. We're a little bit unique in Dane County. You know, a lot of the entities who've done climate action plans are very urban places like Seattle or New York City. Compared to them, we have a significant amount of natural space, farmland and natural areas. And so we're really thinking hard about how we encourage initiatives that store more carbon in plants and soils, in trees, but also in prairies, and how we involve farmers in that effort. So all of those things together are sort of the gist of our plan. The other thing I'll say about this is those subject matter expert groups also came up with very specific target accomplishments, let's call them. These accomplishments we were able to put back into the model where we estimated our baseline so that we could see that if we hit these outcomes, and I'll say these are ambitious outcomes, this is a significant lift. When we hit these, we will reduce countywide emissions in half. And that, of course, is consistent with what the climate scientists are telling us we need to do to maintain a climate that human beings are going to be adapted to living in easily. So we've got a plan that is appropriately ambitious. We issued the plan officially in April of 2020, coincident with the beginning of the pandemic. So we've been mostly moving into an engagement and implementation phase during the pandemic. A couple of the really important things for our office to do in this engagement and implementation effort. First is that we make it easy for folks to do the things we want them to do, whether we're talking about farmers or landowners or businesses or residents. We need to make it easy for them to be part of the solution. The other really important thing we can do is celebrate leadership when we see it. So as a county, we have limited ability to tell people what to do, but we do have the ability to give them a standing ovation when they do amazing things in a way that reinforces what they're doing, but also inspires other people to lead as well. And so a lot of our effort is around that kind of positive reinforcement piece. We also, of course, need to report on how we're progressing on all of this. I want to spend a couple of minutes here just digging in a little bit more to this, the tracking of emissions and sequestration. And so the first thing I'll say here is we're thinking about this issue kind of in the same way we started with, take care of our own operations before we tell other people how to do things. In this year's budget, the county executive set the goal that Dane County's facilities and fleet will be carbon neutral by 2030. And that has really kind of accelerated our efforts to measure the sequestration and emission levels in our facilities and move those two numbers to kind of combine to zero. So we're doing some work on our facilities. I mentioned that we're on the verge of getting all of our electricity from renewable sources. That means we'll be doing more to electrify our buildings and fleet over the next couple of years. Our Land and Water Resources group is also convening a new work team that is going to take on this issue of measuring the natural sequestration of carbon that's happening in some of our initiatives when we restore a new prairie or something. So we're getting our arms around that piece. And I think over the next couple of years, as we have that internal data set and we're able to share that with others, we'll start moving to, just as we're moving to encouraging others to reduce emissions in their buildings, we'll move to a place where we're doing more county-wide efforts to encourage sequestration. Some of you might know that we run a continuous cover program. And, so the continuous cover program is sort of the first initiative on that helps us get at that sequestration. And certainly we're watching closely things like what Organic Valley is doing in this space to see how others are helping farmers and landowners move around sequestration. Just a couple of other thoughts about sequestration. So I come to the sequestration challenge from most of my career was in energy efficiency. And, it's also a place where we count things a lot. In energy efficiency, we might take a high efficiency furnace and put it in 6 homes. And in every home, we're going to get a slightly different level of savings based on the people and what they do and the house characteristics. But over time, we've evolved good ways to estimate savings across households that we say this is a good metric for everyone. And so to some extent, I bring that mindset to this challenge of sequestration that, of course, it's complicated to measure carbon sequestration, but we can't let the perfect answer be the enemy of figuring out if we're making progress and getting things done. And so I think for us, it becomes really important that we do this in a credible and transparent way so that we can continue to learn from what other folks are doing so people can see what assumptions we're making and challenge them if they need to be challenged, but incrementally move toward a stronger estimate of that sequestered carbon over time. The other important thing to say is that when we're thinking about this, we're always thinking about additionality. So we've got parks in Dane County with old trees in them. We don't get to count that sequestered carbon. That's in our baseline. We get to count the new carbon we sequester. So if we buy land and convert it back to a prairie, then we're going to get some sequestered carbon there. And so that's that additionality. The last thing I'd say about this is, as we've worked with our Land and Water Resources team on this issue, it's been really fun to see how sequestration is a benefit multiplier. So in Dane County, we've been buying land strategically to address water quality issues and to help with flood mitigation. Turns out that the things we're doing there also help us sequester carbon. So it's like another good reason to be doing these things, which I think, is always powerful and helpful. The last thing I'll say about all of this is that, our land and water and resources folks have been phenomenal at building partnerships to help them with the land stewardship we do on our county lands. And I think there will be similar and new kinds of partnerships that come in understanding this sequestration. We're really looking forward to learning from what others are doing and to also sharing what we're doing. Part of our vision for everything we're doing around climate is always that we're providing useful information to others to enable them to accelerate their efforts as well. So with that, I am gonna stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Kathy, and sorry for that little blip. Of course, I got booted out of Zoom there for a second. So sorry about that. Never fails, right?
I managed to shut up until you came back. So I think, that was like.
So a little pause maybe in our recording, but
That's right.
thank you. Any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and talk to Kathy directly, that works too. While people are thinking about it, Kathy, sorry, I kind of bounced out for a second, but I know that in Dane County, you have this great big energy and climate department. And how do you work directly with your land conservation departments? Do you have a committee? How exactly do you expect all of these different places within the Dane County to coordinate together?
Yeah, it's coordination is a great question, and so I should correct you that we have an Office of Energy and Climate Change. It's 1.5 people. I mean, we're little, so a ton of the work we do is about leveraging and partnership with other county departments. Maybe one of the examples I can give you to your question is a issue came up recently where we had access to some data about the tree canopy in Dane County and how various tree diseases and development have been substantially shrinking our tree canopy. It prompted us to create a working group that includes people from a variety of county departments, from extension and land and water resources and planning, but also involves people from local cities and villages that are interested in these issues. So we're trying to, always bring that, and increasingly that group is starting to draw some private entities into. There are some other foresters who've been active in our communities around forestation in certain places, bringing all of those folks together to strategize about what levers does each entity have that can help address this issue, and how do we kind of maximize our collective power in telling the story. Trees are incredibly important from a climate perspective. First, they provide cooling, which we need because it gets hotter. Then it turns out that land with trees soaks up more water in those, what I would call semi-heavy rain events. So not when we get 18 inches, but when we get 3 inches in a short period of time, trees help with that. So there's like all of these benefits of trees, and of course they sequester carbon, so there's like multiple ways the trees help us be more resilient. How do we all collaborate in our different ways to bring solutions to an issue like that?
That is a really great point. You've a few people to kind of help this multifaceted, huge issue of climate change. It is going to take quite a group effort across many different levels of government as well. So I thank you very much. If you're stick around for a little bit, hopefully we have some time for a couple more questions, and hopefully I don't get booted out again. Bob, are you on?
Yes, I am. Great work in Dane County there, Kathy. Inspiring.
You're ready to go ahead and share your screen when you are set.
Okay. All right.
And please feel free to put any other questions in the chat. Hopefully we have a few more minutes at the end to go back and ask both Bob and Kathy.
So you can see my slides are right there,
It
Christina?
looks great, Bob.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Christina asked me to share what we've been up to in Monroe County as far as the Climate Change Task Force. I am Bob Micheel, the Monroe County Land Conservation Department Director. So when I speak to this task force, I'm representing a lot of different county departments, personnel, farmers, landowners, different organizations, along with our state partners that participate with us, because it is a huge task. I think the key point here is things got off the ground in 2019 when the Monroe County Board unanimously passed that they're recognizing that climate change is happening and supportive of the climate change task force creation along with their efforts. And so on the right, you see 10 objectives that we've created. Basically, it's our work plan as we move forward into the future, things to address. Keep in mind that we're in the driftless area and the different challenges that we face, specifically when you add the amount of precipitation that we've been encountering. The unique thing about Monroe County is the different watersheds. We have basically 4 rivers that start in Monroe County and lead out to our neighboring counties. So whatever we do in Monroe County obviously affects others. That precipitation, when our average annual rainfall is 33 inches, and one summer we had close or over 60 inches, makes a difference in land use and what you can and can't do. But specifically, you look in 2019, just to give you a highlight, what's really beating us up is that rainfall intensity when you get 4 or 5 inches in an hour and a half, or 1 inch in 20 minutes, or 6 to 8 inches in 2 hours. You can't design your way out of that. So that 100-year flood event that happens every year seems to be a common thread in Monroe County. And the impacts of that obviously are felt in agriculture. This is a common site. Rill and gully erosion, obviously wetland issues or wet fields, infrastructure failure. We've had plenty of towns spend millions of dollars replacing crossings once, 2, 3 times a summer. We can't continue to go down that road. Nobody can afford that. Private property, we have basements that are continually being flooded. A lot of people have spent a lot of money creating living space in their basements. So remedying that is very costly. The most extreme thing I've ever seen is somebody actually put a tile system in your yard with sump pumps to get that dry enough to mow. Nature has been reclaiming the valley floor, as you can see over time. Prior to zoning, we're very comfortable about living next to water as long as it's sunny every day. But those valley floors are flat for a reason. And in 2018, you can see why. All the cropland land use and homes being crowding stream corridors. This house was sheared off in 2018. Those are issues. But in 2018 is really, I guess we got national attention when we had 3 structures, these big flood control structures in Monroe County and 2 in Vernon County that breached rainfall event of 12, 13, 14 inches in this area, devastated the area. But the reality is we've been experiencing some major storm events since 2007, and it continues to build up. And if you look at the flood damage that we're accumulating, the cost in Monroe County by decade, look at the 90s, $33,000, that's nothing. In the last 10 years, we're talking millions and millions of dollars, and we can't keep going down that road of reacting. And that's where we need to be proactive. And that's what we're doing with the Monroe County Climate Change Task Force. So if we just look at the people that are living in the floodway, we're in Monroe County, a quick analysis showed that we have about 200 structures that are in the floodway, over 500 in the flood fringe zone, and over 600 in the unstudied floodplain. That's a huge issue when we have these big events. This is an example of one on Little Lacrosse River watershed. I got my little imitation house in the middle that does no longer exist. And I'm going to show you a little short clip here quick. Quick, I hope.
I never imagined that a little creek would come up 7.5 feet high. It was just under the ceiling. The water was so violent. FEMA's reaction was immediate. Within a day and a half, there was an insurance adjuster here. Whatever was left was destroyed. And we ended up filling 9 dumpsters, having the house gutted. I would have lost everything that I've been working for all these years. But having flood insurance saved my life.
So that was Marty Stevenson when he filmed that video with FEMA. That was 2017 or 18. He took this picture the following year after rebuilding. This is one picture out of 5 events that hit his house in 2 years. And this is really what started the buyout program. Here's another example, a person that lives on the Lacrosse River system. This is the view out their backyard. It's pretty cool when it's sunny, but you can imagine what happens when it rains. And so I'm going to show you a little storybook. Basically, 2018 was the declaration that Monroe County was eligible for FEMA funds because of these massive storm events. And so the lead persons on this task was our zoning director and our land use planner. That worked many months and actually years to get this done. So in this story map, we can kind of go through, and the site on the Lacrosse River, you can see, take note of where they're located within that color code, in this case, the floodway. This was one of the properties, was about 1 acre, and had 3 structures that were removed. So this is the one with Marty Stevenson. Notice the color of the mapping here. He's actually in minimal flood hazard area. Obviously, these maps are not always accurate, and this is scheduled to be updated in the next 5 years. So as you can see, just because they're color coded one direction or another doesn't necessarily serve as the outcome during these flood events. 5 times in 2 years. So as we go down the river, all these are in the Little Lacrosse River watershed system. It includes 8 properties that encompass 18 acres. Again, this declaration with our neighboring counties happened in 2018. And so as part of the demolition, you're removing everything off the site. So that is anything structural and permeable surfaces are removed. Again, some of these sites, there was debris from flooding scattered about all over the place. So we needed to clean all that up. Wells were sealed, septic systems abandoned, and everything shaped and seeded. Here's an example of house prior, before, after the demo. You're returning the green space. Obviously, you're returning the green space. You're creating flood capacity for future. And the nice thing about these properties that once you take the properties away, the county owns the property. We can move it on down to the township, but it's got to stay in public ownership and public access, so in perpetuity. So that's what it looks like at the upper end of the Little Lacrosse watershed. 2 years of paperwork from the zoning department, land use planner, and you can destroy a house in about 4 hours. When you think about that, you spend your lifetime investing into your house, and an excavator shows up in 4 hours, it's gone. Lots of money poured into this project. The FEMA funds were a little over $1 million. We also had Coulee Cap funds and the DNR Municipal Flood Control Grant as part of the funding mechanism to this project. So the next thing we can do is we can do a better job of warning people when these flood events are going on. So that involved implementing monitoring systems or weather stations and warning systems in real time by coordinating with emergency management and the National Weather Service. So we settled on Intellisense as a company that has a lot of watersheds, communities from South Carolina to Alaska using their systems. And so that's the company we went with. Here's an example watershed and a deployment schedule. Each number corresponds with a weather monitoring station. So site 3 here, you can see is over in this tributary to the Kiku River. What's there is a sensor that measures water versus air to come up with the depth of that stream. And then you have a solar panel that is charging the system, and the information is relayed to a cloud. And so this device on the right is a tipping bucket. It's a fancy rain gauge that collects precipitation. You get the precipitation amount and the intensity. So this graph kind of shows the time log in relationship to the precipitation. How that information is transferred basically from that digital source to a data storage or a cloud. And so the National Weather Service has access to the cloud. They interpret the data, and then they transfer that information to a advanced hydraulic prediction page that they created. If you look at Monroe County, you see these diamonds that are sitting there. Those are our weather stations. So every time we put a station in, this will be posted on the National Weather Service. So that communication is either direct to the public from the National Weather Service or notifying the county emergency management or dispatch, who can use Nixle to contact people in the right watersheds, or by radio. So the big thing is we need to keep a better job of messaging this flooding that's going on. And along with that, our conservation practices are taking a beating, whether it's grass waterways, streams, and our grade stage structures. So the deployment of our first weather monitoring stations with the Fishers and Farmers Grant, part of the process was locating in the headwaters so we could get a pulse on what's going on in these critical sites. As you know, the new 580 standard labels critical sites as headwaters that channel slope of 0.8% or steeper, along with sections of stream below crossings. So we have that weather monitoring station so we can keep a pulse on the depth of the flooding that's going on and the amount of precipitation and intensity. So we did a hodgepodge of different practices in this stream corridor by looking at the excavated riprap toe versus a keyway, different shaping and seating. And we'll have a pulse on this stream and see how it responds to our practices, obviously to steer our direction as far as what works or doesn't. When you look at these stream crossings, here's an example in a township that replaced this crossing 3 times. So their solution was they created an emergency or auxiliary spillway over the top. So the lowest spot is over the top of that structure. So we know now, history-wise, when this rain gauge tipping bucket receives 2 inches, I can pretty much predict it's going to go over the top of this structure. The other portion is, what do the rest of the crossings look like in this county? So we embarked on a crossing assessment inventory back in 2021. And 2 interns, their job was to go out and inventory all the crossings starting in the southern portion of Monroe County. As you can see highlighted here that we're the only area in the southern part of the state that's actually looking at this. Northern part of the state has been doing this for a while. So we're looking at the crossing condition, that connectivity, fish passage, and overall condition of the crossing. Obviously, we can look at the cumulative effects of these structures and look at a long-term plan to improve stream crossings and the resiliency for climate change. Here's just a snapshot of the Great Lakes Survey 123 data dashboard. So all the information is collected and this can be accessed by the public. We're using Archgis software to conduct the assessment. We have over 1,700 crossings in Monroe County. It's probably going to take us about 3 years to get this done. The red X's check basically the townships that were completed. General findings to this point, Almost 30% of the structures are barriers to fish passage. They're pretty erosive sites, and about 40% of the structures are undersized. Not surprised when you look at towns and how they figure out they're going to put in this size structure. It's usually just mimic what was done in the past. The other thing we've evolved to is permitting private crossings or culverts or armoring stream channel crossing. Is the zoning department and land conservation department go out together to evaluate the watershed? Is there crossings upstream or downstream they could take advantage of, and that whole siting issue? We do have some areas where there's actually 11 crossings in 4 miles, so it's almost a ladder effect. As conservationists, you know, to look at this is, you know, you're addressing the symptoms is one thing, but the first and foremost, we're doing a job of keeping people and structures out of the floodway. So as a conservationist, what can we do? We can mitigate the intense rain events on the landscape. We do that obviously through our soil health practices, cover crops, no-till, but we do realize that it absorbs only so much. When you get these bigger events that you get 4 or 5 inches followed by another 5 inches, there's going to be runoff. And so we can look at practices to manage the runoff events. Grade stave structures are one of the practices. The other thing we just looked at is the land use that's going on over the last 20, 30 years. And so we had Eric Booth with the university and his grad students look at Rulin's Coulee watershed and the Coon Creek watershed. And that obviously that switch from losing all the dairy and going to more a cash grain has made a huge impact. And what we're seeing is about 28% decrease in our contour strips. That's huge because now we're rotating farms, one crop growing on a farm versus every other strip. So that behooves us to do whatever we can to maintain our existing contour strips and improve the land use that's going on. And we are seeing more cover crops happening across the landscape because we want to hold that water on the landscape and protect that soil. Again, managing that flood flow, we can look at wetland project, buffer strips, but in this area, we do a lot with grade stave structures on the uplands. Making a watershed resilient to these climate change impacts. I just took a look at one of the watersheds, sub-watersheds in the Kiku Watershed. We got a sub-watershed of 13,000 acres with about 41 dams or grade stave structures. We also know that a lot of these upland farmers are doing contour strips. There's a good dairy in the area. So you have the contour strips, the hay, the cover crops. That makes a huge impact. So over the long-term conservation impact, water quality impact was great. The sediment reduction over the course of 30 years changes from a class 3 fishery to a class 1 trout stream that actually holds brook trout right in the middle of Amish community. So that's excellent. What about climate resiliency? We did do some beneficial work, but when you have a 100 and 400 year flood event, you're still going to have those major flood factors that are going down through the valley floor. And that goes back to keeping people out of the way. Some design considerations after going through some of these big storm events. Most of our structures have the slope top dam is sloping towards the hillsides or the abutments. And that's all based on settlement factors. Thinking about this, if I were to go back and do that again, you're putting all the pressure points when these dams overtop towards the hillside, which is non-compacted soil, it's virgin soil. So when you design these practices, we need to adapt and think about this structure overtopping and where's the water going to go. So think about that when you design your practices. Maybe keeping the top level or shaping the groins like waterways. And in some areas, if you can increase your design size to a 25-year storm event, you can endure more of these precipitations. So the last project that we embarked on is the Monroe County Climate Readiness and Rural Economic Opportunity Assessment. And we worked with Green Fire and Executive Director Fred Clark. He brought together over 40 different partners focused in Monroe County to look at the vulnerability of climate change and what are the impacts to forestry and agriculture and infrastructure. So how that was done, it was divided out into local teams, sprinkled with the outside professionals and the locals. And we had the climate and hydrology to look at these watersheds and what's going on. Infrastructure damage and the crossings, agriculture and forestry, and what we got out of it. And this should be in final publication in a couple weeks. But basically, we have 18 strategies that are outlined with 80 recommendations. So I just took a little snippet here of the strategies and recommendations that came out of that. So it'll be up to Monroe County to look at this and harvest what we can and move forward. Obviously, it all takes money. The neat thing with this is you can look over on the right here. How does that recommendation, what does it address? Public safety, resiliency, soil, air, and water, carbon. So everything we do takes money. When we started talking about the weather monitoring stations, we had local people that were in the Kiku Watershed that were very concerned with what was going on. We actually had one village president that knocked on 50 some doors and raised 20,000 in donations to get this off the ground. But so the other thing is I have a land use planner that's a grant writer. So I've been pretty fortunate that we pulled in a little over $1.7 million in grants to keep this project moving. So with that, that's a snapshot of 2.5 years and 20 minutes of what we've been doing in Monroe County. We'll open it up to questions, and then we'll leave this thing up for your credits, I guess.
Thanks, Bob. All right. Well, even though Katie Abbott outbid me on the silent auction, I will ask her question anyway. And she's curious about how the homeowners and the larger community feel about the buyout program.
So it's very emotional for the people that actually are getting flooded over and over. I can't stress that enough. When you have the opportunity to buy them out and they can seek housing and somewhere else that's high and dry, it is definitely a relief. The other people that are around them, obviously, they're not in their position. It's well supported. Again, it's unfortunate we have to wait for reacting to a symptom to get the funding versus being proactive and have a funding pool to keep people out of the way in the infancy or the beginning.
Can you put your, Eric will get that code back up there in just a second. You took the code out before folks could. I can get a new one up there too. Okay. What is the average cost of a buyout?
So it's appraised value is based on prior to the flood or the storm damage. So they look at the markets at that point. So in some cases it might have been 3 or 4 years ago when they appraise it. So your range is anywhere from $160,000 up to $250,000 that we're looking at in this situation.
Any other questions? Here we go. What are the funding sources for staff time on climate action plan writing? And maybe if if Kathy's still available and you have any additional resources or responses to some of these, I think your perspective would be great in some of these bigger questions.
So obviously the Land Conservation Department Director pushing this climate change task force and pushing it along. I have a land use planner under Land Conservation Department that spends time going after grants, not only for that climate change task force effort, but for land conservation or water quality efforts. But I will testify that it is a full-time job. You could easily commit one person to that effort. And I think Kathy can obviously testify to that too. So, but we have county support. It all goes back to the county board unanimously approving our efforts. So that makes everything work in Monroe County.
Yeah, I would agree that the county board support is super important for us too in Dane County. And we have secured a little bit of foundation funding to support some of our I talked about the creating the baseline and modeling things. We got a grant from, I think we got funding from the McKnight Foundation and the Carolyn Foundation. So those are both entities that are interested in local governments taking on climate issues. I think there are a number of foundations that believe local governments are going to be the entities that lead in Wisconsin. And so I think there is some funding there, but as Bob alluded to, there's a lift to get it. You've got to make those relationships and write those proposals.
Yeah. Do you have countywide zoning, Bob?
No, half our county is zoned.
Just half. And Kathy, do you have countywide zoning there? Do we have countywide zoning in Dane County?
I don't know.
Oh, maybe Amy can chime in on the chat and help with that. Matt has a question for both of you. For counties who haven't experienced catastrophic flooding or any other extreme weather events that kind of drive a county to make these declarations, what advice do you have on framing the discussion and appropriate first steps that a county can take? Kathy, do you want to start since?
Sure. I mean, I think, there's a reality that this is an easier conversation to start in Dane County than some other parts of Wisconsin, just because of who we are. Although I would point everyone to the Yale climate map. So Yale's climate opinion maps look at the level of concern about climate change on a county by county basis. And there is only one county in Wisconsin where it's under 50% of residents think climate change is a problem that they worry about. So I think people are increasingly aware that this is out there. It's just an easy thing to push off to, thank you. You guys are, Christina, you guys are amazing. Look how fast you did that. I think for us, the bigger challenge is people recognize it's a problem, but other problems seem more immediate until you're standing in the floodwater. For us in Dane County, one of the things that's helped in some of the rural areas is we have a county-wide natural disaster hazard mitigation plan that we work on with FEMA, and local communities are part of our planning effort. And some communities participate and some don't. After the 2018 flooding, it was really evident to residents in some communities that neighboring communities somehow were getting a lot more support from FEMA because they had a plan. Then, so like things like that can help people go, oh, we should have a plan because look how much more resources that community got than us, kind of thing. But that's a painful way to help people understand there's urgency to this, and
Yeah,
I would
do you have
add,
anything to add?
on the other side of it, because of all the disasters and the politics of climate change, flooding doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. So when you're at the county board and everybody's experiencing and knows somebody that has flood issues, whether they can access a field for farming or their house got wiped out, it's an easy sell. I'm not sure if we didn't have disasters and something we can point to immediately, how successful I would be in selling the climate change task force. That's a good question.
Bob, Kurt's wondering if there is a county, if there's what the county has to maybe put in for those buyout program, any costs associated there?
So the financial end of it was covered by FEMA, the state DNR municipal grant program, and Coulee Cap. Our county time from staff was the match. So there was no dollars pitched by the county other than staff support.
Great. And Katie Abbott is asking a follow-up. For the smaller counties without access to the extra funding, what, from your experience, are some of the more affordable, effective first steps they could take to address climate change? Great question.
I think is that the assessments that you can do locally, some GIS work, focused on the valley floors and these vulnerable structures, taking a look at that, kind of building a plan and working your way up the watershed. That identification, again, we didn't have any funding, but we had people that were motivated and sought out donations just to get some weather stations out here, because it's all about the National Weather Service being able to predict these storm events. When you don't have a lot of data coming from the county, it's very broad, and these storm events are very specific or isolated. We can have 3 inches in one watershed to the south and we get a ½ inch up here. Why would we know what's going on down there? But the more data we can supply the National Weather Service, we're going to be able to warn the public. So there's opportunities in motivating people to do things. But I think in-house, identifying vulnerable areas, looking at land use and the impacts are all things that you can do. But again, it's that commitment to time and effort.
The thing I would maybe add there is I think there are opportunities through Wiki, through the university, through those Wiki members to maybe partner with some of those smaller counties and maybe help with some of that measurement. I mean, those are good grad students projects to figure out where in a county there should be those. And then you start to have real data you can talk about. So this isn't some political issue that's about what somebody on TV thinks. It's about what we're measuring in our communities. And I guess the other thing I would say there is, I think a reasonable place to start is always just with what folks are observing in their communities. How is the weather changing? How are things shifting in ways that make some things more complicated for us than they used to be? Here in Dane County, our organic farmers are telling us that these extreme rain events mean that probably in the next decade, we won't have carrots and sweet potatoes in our CSAs anymore because because you can't grow things that keep popping out of the ground and floating away, essentially. And, that's like, when we talk about that, it touches people in a different way than the politics of climate change. It's oh yeah, that's why these things are happening in my garden and I care about this and how does this all fit together? And you start from that commonality instead of the politics of this.
Definitely. Another question, we have a couple minutes left, from Paul Tollard. Many of the counties are working on 9 key element watershed plans to reduce runoff, but they don't really take into effect changing climate, hydrology. Any thoughts on our current situation, our current planning process, and this new conversation about climate change? Not so new for some of us.
I would argue that in some cases you are making your watersheds more resilient. It comes in all forms and shapes, whether it's a structure or a wetland project or working with a farmer on cover crops. You are essentially working on climate change measures. You're maybe not taking credit for it. We need to do a better job with that. And Christina knows that's the one thing with our efforts at land conservation. We need to start taking credit for those carbon actions.
Yeah, agree. Well, I'll take that pitch then, Bob, and take a second just to give you, I'm going to throw our conservation members hub, and we have a climate resilience page. It is a growing page, but that is a good place to start with some resources. As Kathy mentioned, the Wiki effort, their updated report was out just last week or maybe the week before, and they will be here tomorrow. Steve will be here to talk a little bit more about some of the strategies that came out of that report. And I agree that is a great place to start talking to people, is with this updated report and many other resources that are on our website. We've had Danielle Shannon come through quite a few times to talk from NIAX's perspective on adaptation workbook, and we do plan to continue with the climate resilience program, more training, and let me know if you have anything that you're looking forward to. Well, thank you both very much for joining us today. And thanks everyone else. We are going to take a little break here and we'll be back in, what do we got, 15 minutes? I'll keep losing my time here. Yep, we'll be back at 2:30 with Beyond the Field Edge, Forest Management and Water Quality. Thanks everyone.
Christina.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.